Fired up? In a nonpartisan kind of way? As this is a nonpartisan talk, I'm starting with Senator Robert A. Taft, who said that the whole basis of the American Constitution is complete separation of church and state. It is not necessary to review the reasons for this.
Hear, hear.
End quote. Unfortunately, we are reviewing the reasons for this. For the man nicknamed Mr. Republican, the division of sacred and civic power was so fundamental that it was a given. And yet today, political right-wing is trying to tear down the wall of separation between church and state. So it is up to us, all of us, everybody who respects the Constitution, whether you are liberal or conservative, religious or not, to protect the power of this simple phrase that Jeffrey read earlier. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So what does that phrase mean? It certainly means that you cannot have the state establish a state religion. It also means that the law must protect the free exercise of religion. It also means that the state must remain neutral between religions. And it also means that the state must remain neutral between religion and skepticism, atheism, free thought, between the religious and the non-religious. I'm going to come back to all of these pieces during my talk. Part of the marvel of the Constitution, though, is that it honors ideals, even though sometimes those ideals clash. Good law is often a balancing act. And there's a vital tension in America regarding religion. In order to ensure the free exercise of religion, we created a system that inhibits government meddling in religion through taxation. After all, as Chief Justice Marshall said 200 years ago, the power to tax is the power to destroy. That's why we minimize the government's ability to tax religions. Religious exemptions, however, seem to violate the government's claimed neutrality between the religious and the non-religious. But I don't believe that the solution is to start taxing mosques, synagogues, churches, and ethical societies. Because the power to tax institutions could open the door to a pernicious government intrusion into matters of exploration of deeply personal and metaphysical matters. So my position is that religious institutions receive special tax status in exchange for strict regulations concerning religious intrusion into civic affairs. So the ethical society trades away unrestrained political activism. Sorry, Kate. We trade that away in exchange for freedom from government coercion through taxation and other means. So this compromise maintains the wall of separation between church and state. Now, ethical culture, through its federating organization, the American Ethical Union, energetically defends the wall. The AU has passed many resolutions, such as in 1962, when it said that it is, quote, firmly opposed to any breaching of the constitutional wall, and demanded that the Selective Service Act, for example, no longer defines religion as belief in a supreme being, so that conscientious objectors who are non-believers can still be counted. That was in 1967. In the 80s, the AU opposed the use of government funds and land for religious holiday symbols. In 1983, it condemned the frightening remarks of President Ronald Reagan when he said that the U.S. is compelled by Scripture and the Lord Jesus Christ to oppose Russia with all military and political means. That is terrifying. Ethical culture cooperates with many groups like America's United for Separation of Church and State. In Philadelphia, here we work with the Delaware Valley chapter and Ed Joyce. Other allies include the Free Thought Society, Margaret Downey, who will speak more later, the Secular Coalition for America, of which the AAU is currently a member, the ACLU, the American Humanist Association, and together we insist that those people be resisted who are advocating prayer in our school, the Ten Commandments in our courtroom, or exclusively Judeo-Christian religious displays on public property. Humanists have to use reason to counter a twisted logic that says maintaining a strict separation between the civic and the religious is somehow a conspiracy against religion. Now stay with me here, because this is what's happening. The right is redefining the separation between church and state as an attack on religion, and that is faulty. That is wrong. This is a tactic that Jesse Helms used when he said, when the U.S. Supreme Court prohibited children from participating in voluntary prayers in public schools, the conclusion is inescapable that the Supreme Court not only violated the right of free exercise of religion of all Americans, it also established a national religion in the United States, the religion of secular humanism. Those defending the wall of separation have been mischaracterized by the right as being anti-religious, and we have to educate the public about this. Years ago, a conservative spokesman for a group called Citizens United for Responsible Education said that the American Ethical Union, that's us, is part of an anti-God cartel. That was the phrase, along with the Unitarian Universalists, the ACLU, and the American Humanist Association. And that's absurd. As a minister in the ethical culture movement, I want to bring out what is the best in our civic and political institutions and in our religious institutions. That's what the wall is about. So my thesis today is that the wall of separation has been and is good for all. The religious, the non-religious, the theist, the humanist. It defends our secular institutions and rights, as well as our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, and our ethical societies. So the mantra for today is, it is a wall for all. Repeat after me. It is a wall for all. Now, this was true in colonial times. To the pious Puritans of New England, the wall of separation kept the church pure and free from government intrusion. And to more secularist Virginians, the amendment protected against religious threats to the purity and freedom of the state. The wisest of our founding fathers appreciated both purposes of the wall. George Washington of Virginia was very sensitive to the colonies in the middle and the north who had a lot of more religious minorities in them. He was tolerant of Catholics. He would praise the religious pluralism of Pennsylvania. He wrote very warm letters to Jewish congregations, and he acknowledged the Universalist Church of John Murray when he came to our shores. Both Washington and Jefferson supported Baptist demands for religious independence from state control. They hoped to avoid the intolerant persecution that was seen in Europe and drove so many Americans across the Atlantic, colonists. So in the words of James Madison, quote, "The purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries." Madison knew that this practical distinction between church and state was essential to the purity of both. I mean, you can take the state I was born in, Connecticut. It's hard to imagine, but Connecticut had a state church up until 1818, after the Constitution. Jefferson was so happy when it occurred that he said the church was finally disestablished in the state, welcoming, quote, "the resurrection of Connecticut to light and liberty." He wrote to Adams and said, "This den of priesthood is at length broken up, and this Protestant popedom is no longer to disgrace American history and character." Wow. Powerful words. So, fast forward to this century. In response to the religious zealots trying to rewrite history and tear down the wall, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor declared, "Those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state must therefore answer a difficult question. Why would we trade a system that has served us so well for one that has served others so poorly?" Justice Hugo Black warned that a union of government and religion tends to destroy government and degrade religion. So history teaches us that is a wall for all. The wall of separation acknowledges to a degree America's fear of the concentration of power. This is a hugely important aspect of our national character. Government and religion are two of our most powerful institutions. When they combine, they can result in religious wars, inquisitions, and crusades. And popes and comedians agree. I got one of each. My favorite social sage, George Carlin, said, "I'm completely in favor of separation of church and state. My idea is that these two institutions screw us up enough on their own, so both of them together is certain death." Well, I'm less cynical than George Carlin. I actually think that both government and religions do tremendous good to our country on their own. When enlightened leaders run these organizations, they give civic stability and direction. The real danger is when they are combined. The poet Yeats said this in his poem, Church and State. "Here is a matter, poet, matter for old age meet. Might of the church and state their mobs put under their feet. But O heart's wine shall run pure, mind's bread grows sweet. That were cowardly song, wander in dreams no more. What if the church and the state are the mob that howls at the door? Wine shall run thick to end, bread tastes sour." Took me a while to figure out what that meant. But bread will taste sour if church and state join together. If they become the mob that howls at the door like it did during the Spanish Inquisition or in Salem, Massachusetts. Combining religious and civic power breeds tyranny. Now, not only does the separation help society as a whole, clearly it benefits religions themselves, and that's my main point today. Madison, who was the father of the Constitution, pointed this out. He said, quote, "The religious devotion of people has been manifestly increased by total separation of church and state." The wall helped produce our vigorous religious nation. De Tocqueville, traveling around the country in the 1830s, spoke to clergy people, and he said, the main reason for the quiet, this is what the clergy said to him, the main reason for the quiet sway of religion over the country was the complete separation of church and state. I have no hesitation, this is de Tocqueville, in stating that throughout my stay in America, I met nobody, lay or cleric, who did not agree about that. 1830s. So clergy from an ever-expanding diversity of faiths agree with this. At our nation's founding, really that clause was mainly a way to level the playing field for different Protestant sects. As Catholic immigration increased, it became seen as and understood as protecting all Christians. As Jewish immigration increased, it began to be called for all monotheists, or people of the Old and New Testaments. Then you add Muslims, and you add Hindus, and you add Buddhists, and that phrase becomes understood as being greater and greater. And then with Barack Obama reminding us at the first inaugural, hoping he does it in the second, that in fact non-believers are included, that brief and shining moment is important, and it reflects our constitutional principles. Again, Judge Robert Jackson, valiant fighter for due process and citizens' rights, something that I know that he picked up as chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials. In the landmark decision of 1947 in the case Everson versus Board of Education, Jackson's majority opinion indicated the wall's protection of non-believers. And in 1952, he wrote the following words: "The day this country ceases to be freed for irreligion, it ceases to be freed for religion." Now, it's disheartening that 3 decades after Jackson wrote those words, you read the words of Justice Rehnquist, who said that the court should abandon entirely its approach to the First Amendment, to the Establishment Clause, regarding defense of irreligion. Rehnquist said, "Nothing in the Establishment Clause requires government to be strictly neutral between religion and irreligion, nor does the clause prohibit Congress or the states from pursuing legitimate secular ends through non-discriminatory sectarian means." In other words, the state can do its work through religious institutions. Combine that with the power of religious fundamentalism in this country, and I'm even more aware of the dangers to our constitutional rights, especially for non-believers. So if the government's to protect a wide range of belief systems, from free thinking to religious, some think that the best way to do is to just have a free market approach to it. There's some argument for that. Let the religions sink or swim on their own. Benjamin Franklin said that when he said, when a religion is good, I conceive it will support itself, and when it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call on the government for help, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one. So, while religion flourished in the United States relatively free from government legislation, at the same time, many European countries with an official state church saw a withering of religion. Scholars note that the Church of England has lost its special quality, seen by many British simply as another part of the government bureaucracy, like the civil service, easily ignored or dismissed. Without a wall, religion can become mundane. Well, in a country that values liberty as much as the United States, I think one of the most important benefits of the wall is the protection it affords to religious minorities. As part of a fall panel discussion that America's United organized here, I learned quite a bit about early Baptist activism for the separation of church and state. I learned about 2 letters to Baptist groups that Thomas Jefferson promised freedom of worship in, and that's a promise that's cited in the Supreme Court in its defense and its use of the term wall of separation that they took from Jefferson's words. And the Baptists have been fighting for that for a long time. In 1925, the year of the Scopes Monkey trial, one of the more colorful examples of the problem of when state and church joined together, right, in Tennessee, the Southern Baptist Convention issued their Statement of Baptist Faith and Message, and it said, this is a very clear statement from the Baptist Church. Some of my prejudices had to be put aside in ignorance. Church and state should be separate. The church should not resort to the civil power to carry on its work. Amen.
Yeah. I'll
Yep. Ethical culture leader Ed Erickson wrote a number of books on these topics. And he said that we have a lot in common with people of many faiths, especially those who support the wall of separation. He said, the historic alliance of liberal and evangelical forces, joined in support of freedom of thought and separation of church and state, brought into being and sustains our pluralistic secular democracy. Our ignorance of that history hands over to right-wing fundamentalists some sort of sense that they have a monopoly on the religion issue, and they do not. From the moral majority of the 80s to Jerry Falwell to Pat Robertson today, intolerant bigots have defined the battle over the wall as between God-fearing, faithful, and godless atheists. That's not what it is. Many Baptists work with many humanists to defend the constitutional right of all religious minorities. Humanists know that we also have to defend the rights of a minority of one. Excuse the gendered 18th century language of the next quote by Robert Ingersoll, the great agnostic. He praises the writers of the Constitution for their wisdom. He says, they knew to put God in the Constitution was to put man out. They knew that the recognition of a deity would be seized upon by fanatics and zealots as a pretext for destroying liberty of thought. They knew the terrible history of the church too well to place in her keeping, or in the keeping of her God, the sacred rights of man. They intended that all should have the rights to worship or not to worship, that our laws should make no distinction on account of creed. They intended to found and to frame a government for man and for man alone. They wished to preserve the individuality of all, to prevent the few from governing the many and the many from persecuting or destroying the few. 120 years ago. Ingersoll's right. The wall doesn't just enhance the purity and freedom of religions, it also protects civic life. Many founders, like Jefferson, were accused of being atheists, but thank goodness the Constitution demanded no religious litmus test for our political leaders. So now we have a broader pool of potential candidates to be our leaders. He praised the fact that government service was open to everybody. He said that in the enlightened age, he was talking about his time, in the enlightened age and in the land of liberty, it is our boast that a religious man's tenant will not forfeit the protection of laws, nor deprive him of the right of attaining and holding the highest offices that are known in the United States. That's why the delegates to the Constitutional Convention said that there would be no religious test to those seeking office. That's why you can affirm rather than swear the oath of office. And that was a historical tip of the hat to the Quakers, but is actually a testament to tolerance for all future generations. Without such a commitment, John Kennedy, the only non-Protestant president we've had, would not have been elected. So, how do we tell when the wall of separation is being damaged? How do you tell when you cross the line? So put on your thinking caps. This is the lesson. You have to know this if you're going to counteract the lies from the right. We have 3 tests at our disposal. The first is known as the Lemon test, and it comes from the Lemon versus Kurtzman decision in 1971. How many of you have heard of the Lemon test? Raise your hands, class. How many of you could explain it to your neighbor? I hope more hands go up, even though this is a very short lesson. We have a member of the Philadelphia Ethical Society actually to thank for this, Alton Lemon, who some of you longtime members may know. I just found this out yesterday. I was stunned when I found this out. I didn't realize it. He was a member of the Philadelphia Ethical Society, Humanist Society, and I think he might have been president of the board, in fact, when he was here. He won the 2003 Freedom from First Amendment Hero Award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation for his successful challenge of Pennsylvania's use of public funds to support religious schools back in 1971. In the decision, the court said that in order for a law to be constitutional, 1, it must have a secular purpose. This is all, by the way, on a handout. There are a few copies out there outside. You can take it on your way home. It has to have a secular purpose. 2, it has to be neutral between religion, neither hindering nor advancing. 3, it has to be neutral between religions, and it has to avoid excessive entanglements. And 4, and this is, I think, one of the more important ones, that it has to be neutral between religion and non-religion. Okay. Now, one of the challenges for understanding the Lemon law, the Lemon rule test, is that it's hard to tell what the purpose of a law is. How do you know the motives of the legislature? Those 3 are important. In particular, the first 2, secular purpose and neutral towards religion. Sandra Day O'Connor offered another test. She called it the endorsement test. And this test said that a law is unconstitutional if, in the mind of a reasonable observer, the importance of reason, a reasonable observer, the government is endorsing or disapproving of religion. And this is particularly important regarding sort of public ceremonies and religious displays. A final test that Justice Kennedy offered was something called the coercion test. This mainly applied to non-denominational prayer in public schools. Justice Kennedy said that even if a prayer was not required, if it was voluntary, in a school setting for children, it feels like coercion by the state. So we have lots of ways to tell when the wall is crossed or not. Now, it's not easy to do this. You have to know and you have to study, and I make mistakes when I try to figure this out too. Because the fact of the matter is that the test is not always exact. The separation is difficult. As I stated in the beginning, for example, in order to assure free exercise of religion, sometimes the government needs to regulate religion, such as laying out protocol for political activism. And certainly our political leaders can consult their deeply felt religious beliefs when they decide policy. Nobody is saying they can't do that. That's a red herring. It's absurd. But the majority in the Lemon case admitted that, quote, total separation is not possible in an absolute sense. Some relationship between government and religious organizations is inevitable. They continue, the line of separation, far from being a wall, is blurred, indistinct, and variable barrier, depending on all the circumstances of a particular relationship. So, it's a necessary but unfortunate fact But we have to constantly study what the law means, understand where it applied, and know when that blurred, indistinct, and variable barrier has been crossed. It's not easy. So know the history, know the law. For example, should government be able to sponsor religious holiday symbols, like nativity scenes and menorahs, that leave no room for humanist symbols, like the tree of knowledge that we've taken in since the Chester County Courthouse this week has denied that it can be in Chester County? What about Catholic hospitals or institutions receiving government money but refusing birth control? What about religion in public education? Perhaps the most contentious and multidimensional battle over the wall. Well, regarding education, I'm going to repeat what I mentioned earlier. The right wing is particularly good at framing the topic so that it serves their agenda. They describe defenders of the wall of separation within public institutions and education as hostile to religion. But in reality, school students on public school grounds every day are constitutionally protected. Within certain parameters, private expression is and should be protected. But public allocation for tax dollars for religious schools has to end. We have to stop draining public schools of vital resources through voucher schemes. This danger was noted as far back as the late 1800s, when public schools were beginning to proliferate across the country under the Grant administration. Ulysses S. Grant wanted a strong wall of separation. He said, "Encourage free schools and resolve that not $1 of money shall be appropriated for the support of any sectarian school. Resolve that neither state nor nation or combined shall support institutions of learning other than those sufficient to afford every child growing up in this land of opportunity a good common school education, unmixed with sectarian, pagan, or atheistical tenets. Leave the matter of religion to family altar, church, and the private schools, supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separated." 130 years ago, over and over and over again. The American Ethical Union has supported this reasoning. Again, in 1961, passing a resolution resisting trends chipping away at the wall by allowing for religious symbols displayed inside and outside public schools, or the phrase, "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of school. It opposed the use of public funds for non-public schools, for payments of teachers, salaries, services, tuition reimbursement. In 1971, it criticized the government's aid to parochial schools because it violates the Jeffersonian principle that to compel a man to furnish through taxation contributions for the propagation of religion, these are Jefferson's words, in which he believes is sinful and tyrannical. I wonder whether the word sinful is an ironic use by Jefferson. We defend the principle of free public schools as the cornerstone for democracy. And the AU demanded, quote, "leaving support of private and parochial schools to those religious institutions who wish to operate and pay for them without government assistance." In 86 and in 2000, we again declared our opposition to school prayer and voucher schemes. It's a never-ending struggle. It's not going to end. We can't let down, especially regarding public education, where openness, tolerance, and questioning are fundamental. Religion too often demands closed minds and submission, characteristics diametrically opposed to a liberal arts education. Learning, as well as civil life, requires openness. The Anti-Defamation League. Public schools mold children into good citizens by teaching core values of pluralistic democracy, openness, freedom, and tolerance. Our public schools, they continue, must therefore be hospitable to students of all faith and no faith. Public schools should teach an understanding of and respect for diversity, as well as a spirit of acceptance and inclusion. Now, 25 years of teaching taught me that the best way students learn is when they question, is when they have an open mind. Certainty can breed narrowness, intolerance, and cruelty. We've seen it again and again and again. And we need to nurture a multiculturalism that keeps openness, communication, and respect the center of our school system. Everyday students should figure out how to live with other people whose values differ from them and when to stand up for their own values. What's so unique about American democracy is that our diversity demands a pragmatic democracy, full of compromises. One of our most revered presidents echoed this with the following words. Jeff worried he didn't have enough quotes. I got enough, so sorry. What president is this? We in the United States, above all, must remember that we were founded as a nation of openness to the belief of all peoples, and so we must remain. Our very unity has been strengthened by our pluralism. We establish no religion in this country, we command no worship, we mandate no belief, nor will we ever. Church and state are and must remain separate. We are free to believe or not believe. All are free to practice a faith or not, and those who believe are free and should be free to speak of and act on their belief. Prize for whoever gets who that was. Ronald Reagan. Did he mean it? You know, he courted fundamentalists all the time. He violated the wall all the time. Maybe he just said it because it was getting him allies at the moment. I like to think that that was a moment of intellectual honesty and clarity for him. But I cannot end today's talk with Ronald Reagan. So, I'm going to end with a quote from a president who would not have been president without the wall of separation. John Kennedy. A Catholic president, he said, "We live in a liberal democratic society which embraces wide varieties of belief and disbelief. There is no doubt in my mind that the pluralism which is developed under our Constitution, providing as it does a framework within which diverse opinions can exist side by side and by their interaction enrich the whole, is the most ideal system ever devised." Republican Robert Taft, my grandfather, would agree. Let's defend the wall of separation, because it is a wall
for all.
For all. Oh, we can't end with that. It was a wall
for all.
Thank you very much.